The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be back again with you here today. And we almost didn't have a show because our guest is in the wilderness, literally, as far as I can tell. She's going to tell us a little bit about that. But we are here today with Katie Arnold, who is the author of Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World, the Zen and the Art of Running Free. And I can't wait to get into this because it's such an interesting story. And it really speaks to me about how we can use our minds to heal after significant trauma. Katie Arnold is a practitioner of Zen, which we're going to talk about what that actually means. And she's going to tell us about healing from devastating accident, using Zen as a practitioner, and talking a little bit about the massive injury that she experienced while on a remote river trip. She's a journalist, Zen practitioner, and author of Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World. And I'm going to actually start with this question and an introduction to Katie. I'm not going to ask you to answer it yet, but what I want you to answer eventually is, what is Zen actually? And, what are we really talking about? Because, this is a practice that not that many people really understand. And I know that it was a core piece of your work as part of your recovery. So, I think it will be a very interesting conversation. I want to tell people that I understand one of the things that was the big motivator of this book is that in 2016, you flipped your raft, you shattered your leg in the middle of a remote location on the Salmon River, that you're an elite athlete, and you had to confront this broken body and the pain of all of that. So thank you for joining us, author and journalist Katie Arnold, who is a 100 Leadville marathon winner. So this means you have actually run 100 miles after this accident. So this gives us an idea of what an awesome human being you are, powered.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Anna. It's really wonderful to be here. And it's a brief flashing right now that we are connecting. And I'm on this beautiful bike tour in rural Vermont. And so it's wonderful to be here. And I can't wait to share my story with you and your listeners.
why don't we just start with that? Because, anyways, your book is called Brief Flashings, and here you are in a remote place. I know you sent my team a email saying you didn't know if you were even going to be able to be on the show today, and
Yeah.
you are, and you called it a brief flashing.
Yeah.
So just talk about that as a starting.
So Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World is the title of my book. It's also a line from kind of a seminal book in Zen Buddhism called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And I kind of loosely interpreted it and kind of took it on as my own way of living, which is brief flashings are in the phenomenal world are those little moments that hit us and kind of wake us up to being here. And they're filled with marvel. They're just little hits of wonder, and they're happening all around us all the time. You might think of it as serendipity or kismet or coincidence, but and magic, really. They're little moments that, again, most of the time we're not paying attention, right? Or we're too preoccupied with our phone or our to-do lists or responsibilities, and we miss them. But they're really happening. You and I talking today is a brief flashing, connecting with another human, connecting with ourselves in the wilderness. You feel those flashings, and it can be just the way the light comes in through a window or the sound of an owl. They're often very ordinary, and they're beautiful because they're so ordinary, right? So they're not tied to these peak experiences that are once in a lifetime rare. As you mentioned, me winning a 100-mile race is one of those peak experiences that, doesn't happen very often. And that's a flashing, but they're also just everyday things. And so when I said that we, almost didn't connect because I'm literally out with like only a change of clothes on my bicycle and my phone and a charger and passing through areas with no cell service. And I knew I would be coming through this tiny town. It's probably population 100. And right about now, and I got into the general store to get a cold drink, and I saw that it was the time to take this call. And lo and behold, I had service. So this is a little like hit of marvel to find myself here and on the phone with you.
Just brief flashing. Here we are in that awe moment, and I just love it. I'm interested though in what it is that you're actually calling Zen. And I did a little bit of research, and I went to the Zen Studies Society, and they call Zen, they say Zen is the direct experience of what we might call ultimate reality or the absolute, yet it is not separate from the ordinary, the relative. The direct experience of our birthright. The practice of Zazen meditation is a way of realizing the non-dualistic, vibrant, subtle, and interconnected nature of all life. Can you just unpackage that a little bit for us?
Okay, so Zen, first of all, is something like you just mentioned in this definition that is all about direct experience. So it's about your life right now in this moment, like literally your feet on the ground, smelling, the air, listening to the birds. It's not a religious doctrine. And this goes back, thousands of years to the ancient Zen masters. Like dogma and doctrine and scriptures are not the most important thing, right? It's not a religion for me. It's a way of just being alive. And so that's the most important thing, and I grew up going to church, and it didn't really move me. I'm not a religious person, but I am open to spirituality, but still it's really practical. It's just how you live in the world. It's a way of living, and that way of living happens to be paying attention, eyes open, and being present to what's happening now. It's really seeing the world as it really is, not as we want it to be or wish it or regret that something had happened or clutch to something. It's about opening to this experience in this moment.
That is a very rare thing. I think it's really easy to get distracted with so many things in life.
Absolutely. And I think, what is so moving to me is that it's also like, it's a way, my writing practice really connects with my Zen practice in that I've been a writer my whole life, and writing is just about paying attention. Being a good writer is about seeing what's in front of you right now, and seeing those little details, catching those brief flashings. And so the same things that go into Zen, being present, paying attention, looking around, connecting with others, are what make good writing. And so for me, there's just so much natural overlap between the two. And you know, it's not about believing in a God or a higher power. It's about being present in this moment.
And yet,
it's really quite simple, but
yeah,
it's hard to practice.
I mean, it sounds like, you know, there's a certain piece where you're trying to make it very clear that it's not religious. It's about really kind of being with this present experience. And that is a very hard thing for most of us to do because of all the distractions we experience. And you gave early on in the book, you write about being like a Zen anomaly, like somehow seeing yourself as different than the people who would typically practice Zen. You were giving a talk in 2018, and you were writing that your approach is not really like what one might expect of a Zen practitioner, that you move fast and you wear bright colors and you run while you're meditating rather than sitting in long stretches. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think there's this perception that Zen is quite somber, quite serious. You know, it involves many hours of sitting meditation, which, as you mentioned from that definition, is called Zazen. Zazen is really a very elemental, basic practice. It translates to just sitting. So it's literally just sitting on your cushion. And there's so many different styles of meditation and traditions. But Zazen has always been, I've been drawn to it because it is the simplest. But so there's this sense that to be a Zen practitioner, you have to be quite serious. You have to sit still a lot. And I've always been a very active person. I'm always out in nature rather than, you know, Zen is also you imagine sort of sitting indoors in Zen centers or monasteries. But for me, I've always been most at home outside in nature, in natural places in the wilderness. And but when you read about Zen, you go back and the ancient Zen monks were of the mountains, and they did practice in mountains by walking long distances in mountains. And so I feel a very kindred spirit to that sort of way-seeking mind, moving in nature. So yeah, you know, it took me a little while to realize that I had my own kind of style of Zen, if you will, that it was a little bit wilder. I do sit in meditation, I do Zazen, but often I'll do it on top of a mountain or I'll sit beside a river. And when I do go inside for a formal practice, I find that I do have more stamina than I thought. Just like running long distances, you're always capable of more than you think. And so sometimes when I first come to the cushion, I think there's no way I'm going to be able to sit for 30 minutes. You know, I can run for 30 miles, but I can't sit for 30 minutes. And, you know, lo and behold, if you set your mind to it, you'll do it. And that's another actually very important definition, or Zen sort of resists definitions, but that's a very important quality of Zen, which is to do something in your true spirit with full determination. I think that's a beautiful expression of what Zen is to do something completely, see it through in your own genuine way, and bring to it the full force of your determination. And that applies really well to running long distances.
Yeah, I remember in the book you wrote about how perseverance, really staying with something, is kind of the ultimate Zen.
Yes, it really is. It's in Zen. There's a saying called continuous practice, and that's showing up to practice and practice Zen every day. And your practice might look like sitting in a Zen center, or it might look like running up a mountain. But when you show up for something daily with determination, even when it's hard, you stick with it. That is true Zen.
So that's all of psychology. It's like, you know, people just got that one piece in terms of daily practices and self-care and, you know, really showing up in a fulsome way. We can stop this interview now. We're done.
Yeah, great. I mean, yes.
Because that's it. You know, that is kind of the core of how do you live your life with some grace and some goodness. is showing up, being in this moment,
Showing up
actually,
and being yourself.
Yeah. You wrote about Natalie, this famous author who wrote a classic book called Writing Down the Bones. Some of our listeners may have heard it before or read it before. But you described Natalie as somebody who really showed up for you in a period of time when your father had just died.
Yes.
You had a 5-month-old baby, Maisie, strapped to your chest as you were hiking with her. And you said that just being with her, you can feel like the wisdom was oozing out of her, like a direct transmission from the stages. And she's a longtime Zen practitioner. Can you help us to understand a little bit more about that time with Natalie?
Yes. So Natalie Goldberg is, as you mentioned, extremely well known for, she's written 16 books, and her first and sort of most well-known book is called Writing Down the Bones. And in it, she really linked Zen with writing. And as I mentioned before, writing, when we write with the spirit of Zen, it's just, we write what's exactly in front of us. And you can always get unstuck if you're a writer and you have writer's block, with by sitting down with a blank sheet of paper and literally just seeing. You can always start with what I see right now. And you could write about the grass or your feet or, the trees. And when you write from that place, you can follow your mind, and it will take you myriad remarkable places, none of which you might have gotten to if you'd sat down with a rigid structure. So that's Natalie's, she basically created what she calls writing practice, and was hugely formative and inspirational to like millions of people. And I happened to meet Natalie in the fall of 2010. I had just, as you mentioned, given birth to my second daughter, and I had heard of Natalie's books. And I just saw her walking down the street one day in Santa Fe, where she and I both lived. And I recognized her. She sort of was walking as in a meditative state, her head bowed and her arms, or, her hands clasped behind her back. And I just had this flash, right? A brief flashing that, oh my gosh, I think we'll be friends someday. I had no idea where I thought that, why that came to me. It was a flashing. And sure enough, maybe a week later, I was hiking with my baby in my chest carrier, like I did every day during pregnancy and after. And Natalie was at the trailhead, and she saw me with the baby, and she said, "Is that a baby in there?" And, I showed her, I opened the cover to show her, and she's like, "Is she breathing?" And, in that sort of new mother way, I was terrified, like, I think so. And we became friends. And sure enough, we began a practice of hiking up the mountain every week together. And she wanted me to teach her about hiking up mountains, how to do that with kind of determination, like we were talking about, which is Zen. And I did not understand that at the time. And I thought she might, just by being friends with her, might help me learn more about meditation, which I was really needing some peace in my life because I just lost my father and was in a period of acute anxiety. And so stillness and meditation helped calm me. And so we became sort of mutual teachers of each other. And that friendship has lasted since for 15 years almost. And it's beautiful. She's one of my dearest friends. And we have the deep rapport of writers, fellow writers, and Zen practitioners. And so she's been very important to me. She's not my teacher, I will say, although I think we're sort of both each other's teachers, but she does teach formally many, many, many thousands of writing students every year. And we have more of a friendship, but it's been one of the greatest gifts for me.
That is such a beautiful story. I love the fact that you saw her like almost in a premonition of the truth of your connection. That you were meant to be each other's persons.
Yes. Well, and that's that sort of intuitive feeling that I've always had a very strong intuition. And I think that we all do. Again, it gets covered up and blanketed over by kind of all the shoulds in our life, all of our, oh, you should be this, you need to be more like that, whatnot. And we stop hearing that intuitive voice or that knowing. But it's really like the flashings. I mean, it is a flashing and it's always within us. And we just need to sort of be in a state, practice every day of being in a state of listening for that voice. And when I had that thought in my head, I mean, like I said, I have no idea where that came from. I hadn't, been trying to find her or seek her out. And that intuitive knowing is a very, will guide us where we need to go. It really will. It's beautiful when you hear it and then you're able to follow it.
That's incredible. You talked about your 6-day whitewater rafting trip in this remote area, Middle Fork, Salmon River, the remotest part of Idaho. And
yes,
you said something about being at war with the river, even though you knew that Zen, even at that time, you knew that Zen said, don't fight the current.
Exactly.
You were with your husband. This was an early 10th wedding anniversary gift. You were excited to be part of this. And within the first few minutes of starting on that trip, you had this terrible event happen.
Yes.
And it was just from the sounds of it, it was a catastrophic injury. Can you talk a little bit about facing what you faced and staying on the raft for the entire time? Because that was the part that blew me away as I was listening.
I know, it still sometimes blows me away, but yes. So you captured it beautifully. This was the summer of 2016, and my husband Steve and I were celebrating, as you said, an early 10th wedding anniversary, and we have always had a very deep shared love of the wilderness and rivers and mountains in particular. And we spent a lot of time rafting wilderness rivers, finding, just deep peace in river canyons, kind of away from the hustle and bustle, certainly out of cell range, and rivers as a teacher, like teaching us, as you mentioned, to sort of flow with them and not push against the current. And so we've always been really at home and comfortable on rivers, have a lot of experience doing whitewater river trips, and have taken our daughters on them since they were babies. That said, we had never done the Middle Fork, and it is a premier wilderness whitewater river in Idaho, probably second only to the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon in terms of incredibly beautiful country and very challenging rapids and remote. So this was a 6-day river trip, and it would cover 100 miles of river with 100 major rapids in those 100 miles. And the sort of the symmetry of that number 100, comes back later in the book. But it was challenging. We obviously didn't take our children with us. We were going with a private group, so we had no guide, but we were going with our close friends who had invited us, and then many of their extended friends who had done the river many times between them. So we felt completely comfortable. And as you said, we launched on the river. It's so remote that it's also known as the River of No Return. And we would put that one to the test. But we launched, and within 15 or 20 minutes, so within the first 2 miles of this 100-mile stretch, we did have a fluke accident where the river current pushed us up against a rock, and we found ourselves pinned. And rather than bouncing off the rock like rafts often do, ours flipped. And I went into the river, and as soon as I fell in, after, though, this is important, resisting falling, I held on, right? That gripping sensation of like, no, I don't want to fall. When I finally went in, as soon as I went in, I knew I was badly injured, that I'd injured my leg in some very extreme way. And I sort of got myself to shore, and we regrouped. A friend of mine ran up the shore and helped me down. And then we have to decide what to do, right? And when you're in the wilderness with a group, you make decisions as a group, right? You work as a team. You have to decide what's best for everyone. And so we make the decision to stay on the river. And, obviously if it had been like a head injury or something much worse than a leg, we would have made another decision. But there was a woman training for EMT on the course, an emergency medical technician, and we sort of thought that I had dislocated my knee. And I went with that story. I think in order to stay on the river, I needed to have a story in my mind that wasn't so scary. And I have a very high pain threshold, obviously. And so we decided to stay on for, and there were several occasions downstream where we knew if things got worse or the pain was really bad, that I could call for a bush plane rescue. There's, a few dirt airstrips along the river. Otherwise, it's total wilderness, no road in or out. And so that was our plan. And I switched boats to a bigger raft that was more stable. And then I became, my new mission was that I could not fall out of the boat again. I had to stay in the raft. And in order to do that, I almost had to enter this deeply meditative state where I could only focus on the rapid I was on, right? One rapid at a time. I couldn't think about the 97.5 other rapids downstream and how scary they might be. I could only be on the rapid I was on. And that's really Zen practice right there. And when I could do that, it was a deeply concentrated state. And boy, does that translate to real life, right? Because there are always rapids downstream, even when you're off the river. There's rapids downstream for all of us. And but when we focus on right where we are, we can get through something versus looking ahead and sort of imagining worries or fears. And so that was sort of the start of really healing through this Zen practice. And that was just out of necessity. I had to do that.
Do you think that this changed you as a person, this staying in a deeply meditative state while going through these 100 rapids?
Definitely. Absolutely. I mean, I desperately wanted to get off the river. I'm not going to lie. I was scared. I didn't want to fall out. My husband and I were fighting and trying not to be heard because we didn't want to be those people on a trip, right? We trained ourselves to always be to not be the problem people. We're always ready on time. Our gears, we're organized. We don't forget things. And so we were arguing. I wanted to go home. I was in a lot of pain. But staying on, I think, just showed me that persistence and that determination to be strong and the inner strength that we all have, right? Though I wanted to leave, I stayed. And though I was angry at my husband at times for not getting me off the river, I also wanted to stay with him, right? And I didn't want to be flown out alone. And so it showed me both that I'm deeply connected and loyal to my husband, and I was worried for him. If I left, how would he be safe? And it just showed me how the power of the mind, really, to focus on what's in front of you and to shut out the very frightening things downstream, because there were very big rapids. I will say that the rapid we flipped on was not even a major rapid.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay. So, it's one of those things like we just don't know what we're going to encounter and what happens. But, in my practice, I work with a lot of trauma survivors. It's the thing that I do in my clinic. It's what I have always focused on. And, I work with people who've experienced quite awful things in their lifetime. And I know for sure that somebody having the exact experience that you described may never recover from that because of the devastating physiological, behavioral, emotional, cognitive impact that a trauma like that can have. And you stayed the course throughout the rest of your, 98.9 miles.
Exactly.
And you stayed with your body and your breathing.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that somebody set your leg while you were doing this so that it was stable. But how did you stay with your body and your breathing throughout all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I had, yeah, all we had was an ace bandage, and I had a little leg warmer. So I wrapped it, and then I put this, little leg warmer over it. It was quite swollen. And then when obviously I couldn't bear weight. It should have indicated to me that it was broken. But again, your mind, it's like a survival tactic. You just have to get on board with a story that makes you feel okay. And so that was the first thing, was just really believing, okay, I've just dislocated it. I don't think, in Zen, they talk a lot about what's delusion and what's real. I don't think that was delusion. That was me in that moment, you know, being as present as I could, and being with my body and saying, okay, it's just dislocated. But the ways I stayed, with my breath or with my body was, first of all, just really relying on others to help me. Again, as I mentioned, we were a group of about 20 people. And so my husband and our friend Rob would carry me on and off the boat. And the boatman who was rowing me, um, he took very good care of me and was very caring when I was on the boat, so I could relax as best as possible. And once I got on his boat, he said, I've rowed this river a dozen times. I know it like the back of my hand, and we'll get you down safely. So it was just that very reassuring voice. And I wanted to believe him, and I did. But anything still could have happened. But just the fact that he established that sense of safety for me. And then my other big thing was that I wrote. I've been a journalist and writer my whole professional career, and a writer my whole life. And I always bring notebooks with me, and I write down the day, and I sort of write. That's kind of my Zen practice too. Is, what am I seeing? What am I doing? What am I feeling? And so, because I couldn't, help with dinner, I couldn't load the boats, I couldn't, set up the tent, I spent a lot of time with my notebook, and that my writing practice has always grounded me, always, always. And so that brought me right into the canyon and into my body and onto the river. If I ever wanted to sort of stray away, I would just open my notebook, and bam, I was right back there. And sometimes, rereading it, what I wrote, is like, I want to go home, I'm scared. But you write that stuff anyway, and you move through it.
Amazing. Now, I want to go back to something you referenced, the level of white water. I'm a Canadian. I've been canoeing since I was a child. When I was younger, I used to do whitewater, but I don't think I've ever faced anything like a class 5. And I think you were doing class 5. Can you describe to people what class 5 rapids are?
Right. Okay. So I think the highest maybe on the salmon is a class 4 plus, still big water. So this is like lots of obstacles. What makes a rapid are constrictions in the river's flow. So boulders. So you've got rocks to avoid. You've got hydraulics, so big waves. You've got holes that can sort of, that are formed by rocks, that when you go over them might suck you in the wrong way. And so you've got a lot of rocks, a lot of volume of water, and a lot of constriction. And that creates these big rapids that are technical, and they change at every water level, right? So they might be different one week from the next. And you have to kind of pick your way through and pick your line through, which, the guy who was rowing the boat that I was in, had done it many times and was very familiar. But now Steve, my husband, was alone in our raft. And so I was most concerned for him, almost more than myself, as we rode through in our boat, and I would watch him in his boat. And he did it beautifully. He made through every rapid. And there's a really sweet scene in the book where toward the end of the river trip, I overhear the boatman who rowed me talking to Steve at the river's edge. And he said, you're having a good run. He said that rock upstream was just a fluke. And it was such a beautiful gesture for him, this experienced salmon oarsman, to acknowledge Steve's, capabilities after, an accident that had traumatized him no less than me. Right, to be the one who was rowing when we hit the rock was something. It became this fracture point for us. that we really had to heal as much as I had to heal my body and my physical body, and then my mind, which we haven't really gotten to. But when I did get home to Santa Fe and I went to the doctor, the surgeon told me, much to my shock, that I had shattered my leg and I would need surgery, and that I should never run again. And so to heal my mind with, from that trauma, and then to really sort of repair our marriage, that the river accident was just sort of the fracture that opened, and we saw what was underneath, which was, a 12-year or 16-year by then relationship, 10 years married. Things build up, right?
Yep.
And there's a lot underneath. And so the river accident, my friends were like, oh, you need to forgive Steve. You need to forgive him. And I said, well, I have no question I will. Like, I fell in love with Steve the moment I saw him. But I also know it's going to take the time it takes. And sure enough, it did. And I think that healing process was painful at times, but has been a beautiful one nonetheless. And spoiler alert, like we've come through it. There'll be other things, I'm sure, right? There always are new rapids, but yeah, I think being patient is key, and giving yourself time to heal.
That's beautiful. I want to go back to what you said about the surgeon. So you arrived back, you made it through, you go to the surgeon, and the surgeon says to you, an ultra marathon runner, you should never run again.
Yeah.
And you did something remarkable. And again, this is about your brain, but there's another piece of it that to me is very astonishing, is that so there's two pieces. One is the surgeon says you're never to run again. And this is another piece about how sturdy you are as a human being. We are talking almost on the anniversary date of the most catastrophic event of your entire life. You were in the wilderness working toward another 100-mile race on a bicycle this time. It's this kind of I will be who I am going to be that I keep hearing from you. How did you find your sturdiness in responding to the surgeon about your leg, and the sturdiness required to continue to talk about this thing almost on the anniversary of the catastrophic event?
Wow, that's such a great question. Yes, I mean, I think I found it, everything has led up to that point, right? So being raised the way I was raised, and being, outside in nature, and doing hard things from a young age. And then, having two babies, my first baby, my daughter, was 30 hours of natural labor, and learning step by step that you're always stronger than you think you are. And so that goes into it. But really that moment, as you're mentioning, after the surgeon said that to me, he said, if I were you, I would never run again, and, find a new hobby, very dismissively. And I was alone in his office. I had just come off the river. He was not impressed that I had stayed on the river for 6 days. I hadn't further injured my leg by doing that, but I had used up all my time. So I had to have the surgery right away. And he was going to be my surgeon because I didn't have time to look around. And he assured me he was the best. And but here he was saying, I should never run again. And I was alone in the office, and I just remember crying when he left the room, and thinking I can't, and leaving his office, set to have surgery the next day, and thinking I can't let this person put his negative energy into my body by operating on me, by literally cutting me open. And I just thought that is the antithesis of healing. And so I was so upset. I was devastated. Here I was, thinking I could never run again. And I woke up the next morning, and again, there's that intuitive voice that came to me as soon as I woke, which is, he may be right. Maybe I won't ever run again, but I can't let him operate on me without him knowing me. And I don't mean knowing who I am. Like, I had won a lot of ultra marathons at that point, and I was successful, and I had a book coming out. I don't mean like, he needs to know who I am, but he needs to know I need to be able to voice what's important to me. And so I just had a very clear feeling of what I needed to do, which is I needed to call the surgeon and just explain that to him. And by, again, some flashing stroke of luck, I was able to get his technician on the phone. This is the day before surgery. And then by another stroke of luck, he returned my call within 5 minutes, so quickly that I hadn't planned what I was going to say. But I just spoke from the truth of me and my heart. And I just said, I wanted to say that I am an ultra distance runner, and I'm a competitive athlete, and I'm writing a book about running, and it's not a hobby to me. Mm-hmm. And he, to his credit, he heard me, and he said, I hear you. He didn't change his disposition, but he really listened. And then he said, it doesn't change the surgery I'm going to do, which is I'm going to do the best job I possibly can do. But thank you for telling me. And that was such an important moment of being heard, because I think so often, especially maybe as women, we sort of silence ourselves or shush ourselves, or, play a little bit smaller. And that the courage that it took to do that still startles me sometimes, because it was exactly what I needed to do. And I think that really set me on the path to healing, is speaking my truth from the get-go.
Wow. We have a bunch of emails, so I'm going to start going through some of them and see how we do. The first one is I don't know what this means. Maybe you have a sense of this. This is from Donna, and Donna says, "Hi, Dr. Anna. Thank you for the show today on this long Canadian weekend holiday. Your guest, what are flow camps? What are flow camps?"
Yeah, so I lead these flow camps retreats, and they are 4-day retreats. Right now, they're just for women, but where we go into beautiful places really close to nature, or in the wilderness, and we gather and we spend our mornings moving on the trail. So whether that's running or hiking, and sort of gathering that energy that creates and puts us in that flow state of creativity, right? You and I were speaking earlier. When we move our bodies, we move our imaginations, and we move our minds. And so there are these beautiful weekend retreats of movement, and then we come back and gather and do creative writing, and we watch where our mind goes, and develop practices that we can take home and do anywhere, that put us into that state of flow. And flow state is really just being very present in your life, opening to the flashings, seeing the magic, and being carried by an energy that's bigger than your own. And so you don't have to be a professional writer, a published writer at all to come writing. We're all writers. We're all storytellers. We all have that powerful, intuitive voice that wants to come out. And just being in nature is such a conduit to creativity. And so I offer a couple a year. They're really special gatherings, and you can find more information on my website, which is katiearnold.net.
Oh, magnificent. That sounds wonderful. Thank you. People are asking, this is from Dare, and Dare says, was Katie's upbringing a direct result of who she is now?
Yes. Who I am now is a direct result of my upbringing. And I say that because I was raised by a mother who is exceedingly capable and independent. And she's an accountant, so she speaks the language of numbers, which is not my language, but she models this incredible resilience and absolute bright spirit, right? So she sees the good in everything. She leads from that place of optimism. She's Canadian. Yeah, she was born and raised in Toronto. And then my dad was extremely important to me as well. And he passed away in 2010, as we mentioned. And he was a photographer for National Geographic. So he was the creative parent in my life and sort of modeled for me how to live a creative, artistic life, where your work is an expression of your true spirit. And he took us outside, my sister and me, into nature all the time, out exploring. I mentioned that I'm on a bicycle tour right now. When I was a girl, my father planned 3 or 4 bicycle tours where we would ride around for days with just our clothes and a bag. And so I'm very close to his spirit right now as I'm on my own bike tour. But yeah, he spirit of adventure, and my mother gave me the spirit of just resilience and can-do optimism.
Yeah, I think you do have a connection to Ontario, because I remember reading in the book you say that you go to a cottage in Ontario.
Yes, we spent my mother's mother has had a cottage, or she's passed away, but we've had our cottage on Stony Lake since the late 40s.
Oh, that's the Kawarthas. That's so beautiful.
Yes, yeah, and we're actually we're on our way up there after my bike tour ends. We're heading up to Stony on Saturday in time for Canada Day, and we'll be there for 5 weeks. It's such a beautiful place. It's really where we connect with family and water, and that feeling of being part of a community, right? It's so hard to come by these days. It's multi-generational. It's really special.
Well, you're going to be in one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been. Stony Lake. That's remarkable. I hope you have a great 5 weeks.
Thank you. Yeah.
This one is from Peter, and I think this is actually a fantastic question. Peter says, very interesting show today. Can anyone practice Zen, or is it just for young people? I am 71 years old.
Peter, that is such a great question. Anyone can practice Zen. And I actually would bet that you probably already practice Zen without knowing it's Zen. So if you do anything with purpose, with consistency, with determination and care, that is a Zen practice.
What would you suggest for a beginner book for Peter?
A beginner book for Peter, there's so many out there, but the book that I reference so much in my own book, Reflashings in the Phenomenal World, that was kind of my guide and companion for my long healing process, is a wonderful book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And it's a collection of Dharma talks, which are sort of wisdom talks, given by a very well-known late Japanese Zen master that he gave in the 60s and 70s. And these Dharma talks are, they lay out the basic principles of Zen and sitting and Zazen. And so he explains how to sit properly with an upright spine and your eyes downcast but not closed. And he also explains the spirit of Zen, which is really what it's about, right? You can sit in the proper Zen posture, but you can also sit in your own way or meditate in your own way. But that book is a tremendous, tremendous guide to living with Zen spirit, which is to do something with purpose and consistency. And so even if you start, and just sort of to the practicalities of sitting meditation, you could start for 5 minutes a day or 2 minutes or 1 minute, right? Anything counts. And that's, and you'll find probably your tolerance will build up and your desire to sit will build up. I still only practice, maybe I'll sit for 10 minutes a day. And, but then I practice in other ways with my writing, with my running, with my movement. And so yes, it's absolutely, you could start it at any age. It's wonderful.
That's beautiful. Thank you. This is from Shane, who is saying, someone told me that Katie holds writing seminars. Is that true?
Yes. So that's what we were mentioning before. The Flow Camp is a writing. We do lots of creative writing and creativity at those camps. And my next one is happening on September 5th through 8th in Colorado. And I'm always out scouting locations. And I just found a great location for an East Coast retreat here in Vermont. But those are the main writing retreats. And then sometimes I'll lead I led a day-long writing retreat in Santa Fe, where I live, with Natalie, my dear writing friend. And so I do them periodically for shorter lengths of time. And again, you can find all that on my website, but they're really wonderful experiences. And there's absolutely no experience needed to join.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. This one's from Lisa. Boy, we've gotten a lot of emails about this show. I'm listening to your radio show from an Uber in heavy traffic in Brazil. I, I know, everybody's all over the world. I can
I
relate
love it.
so much to what is being discussed. I have just returned from the most incredible trip to the Amazon. To get there, we had to take a boat ride, a long road trip on sandy pothole roads, another motorized canoe trip to a remote place in the jungle, no airplanes, no roads, no, and Wi-Fi is only sporadic in the dining room. My zen is photography, or taking photos in nature, because for me, it involves quiet, being present, mindful, and fully present in each moment. I also write. I feel fully myself when I'm with nature, away from everything. It feels like the purest, truest state of being.
Yes.
The Amazon, I wanted to cry. I didn't want to leave that way of being. Thank you for an amazing show. I look forward to reading the book. That's fantastic.
That went straight to my heart. Amazing. Yes, that's exactly it. It's Zen is like an intimacy, right? And like not the normal intimacy we think of, but living close to something. So it sounds, was her name Lisa? It sounds like when Lisa was in the Amazon, she was extremely intimate with the experience. So the potholes, just the very nature of that detail, the no Wi-Fi, right? The photographs that she's already, and she obviously has an intimate relationship with photography. That is wonderful. And that's really how we feel most alive. And how fortunate it is, Lisa, that you know that that's your practice. Photography, anything can be a practice, right? Cooking, piano playing. I met a woman this morning who's a piano tuner. She's absolutely passionate about it. It's both her avocation and her vocation. And really, to have an intimate relationship with something enables you to have an intimate relationship with your own mind, and to study your mind and to see the world more clearly. I love that. Thank you so much I just felt like I was in the Amazon for a second listening to your email.
Well, this is the incredible thing about our listeners. They're like really, really brilliant people. And some of the emails that I get, I mean, this is like learning for me. So it's pretty interesting.
I would love for you maybe to share that email with me later, because that is tremendous. And also, I mean, she hits on something that is so core to Zen too, which, Zen is a lot about the interconnection of all beings, and impermanence as a central, the central truth in life is that everything changes. And with that, there's a lot of uncertainty and sometimes discomfort. And so talking about the Amazon, right, is enduring some of those discomforts and learning that actually tolerating uncertainty and impermanence makes us stronger. And it's only when we resist it, like we were talking about earlier, resisting the river, it's only when we resist change that that we suffer as we do. And so way to go, embracing the discomfort sometimes, and the uncertainty. I love it.
It is amazing. This is just a comment from Dwayne. Oh my gosh, what a story. Most folks would have thrown in the towel. Blessings to Katie. She is my idol. And then this one, what books does Katie have out, if any? I know actually, Katie, that you're a journalist. So you, not only do you write books, but you've written articles and you've done a lot of writing for outdoor magazines. It also asks if you do any online consultations.
Well, okay, so that's a great question. So I have 2 books out. Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World is my second book, and my first book actually tells that story of losing my father and sort of discovering how to heal my spirit by using my body. And that was sort of when I learned taught myself how to run ultra distances. That's called Running Home, and that came out in 2019. You can get both at your local bookstores, order them if they don't have it. I'm such a big supporter of local stores. You can also get them online at the usual places. And yes, I do offer consultations online by Zoom. And that's something people, you can get in touch with me via my website. And I love to do that because, like I said, writing is a practice. And when we do it truthfully from our most genuine self, anyone and everyone is a writer and has a very important story to tell.
That is beautiful. Now, believe it or not, we're almost at the end of our show, but I want to say one more thing. You write in your book, Zen, not knowing is considered a form of wisdom. I was really struck by that because I know we all want to nail down everything. Can you just talk to that point?
Yeah, that is one of the most beautiful teachings of Zen. And again, it applies to everything in life. It's not coming from like a scripture or a dogma. There's a Zen koan about it. But it's really it's accepting that truth that everything in life is changing all the time, right? Nothing is staying the same. The only constant is change. And so we can't possibly know what lies ahead. And just like I couldn't know what lay downstream of me after the accident on the river, the beautiful thing about being on a river is you can only see the bend you're on, right? You can't see all the myriad bends and rapids and twists and turns and eddies and whatnot that lie downstream. And so you have to be okay with not knowing. And actually, that, when I say that's a form of wisdom, there's a beautiful line in that book I mentioned, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, that is just a guiding principle in my life and can be for anyone, regardless of their spiritual background. And it goes like this: in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, and in the expert's mind, there are few. So when we live in that mind of not knowing, it actually opens more possibilities to us because you might be capable of something you never even imagined, which, for me, after that accident was, what I never imagined was running a 100-mile race and doing it in such, with such determination and fierce purpose. And, if I had listened to my doctor, who by many standards is an expert, there were few options or few possibilities in his mind. One, mainly that I would never run again. But instead, I listened and followed my own intuition and my body. And there were incredible possibilities that I could never have imagined.
So now I have to know if the surgeon knows that you won a 100-mile race after surgery.
I don't know, but Santa Fe is a pretty small town, and I would guess maybe he does. But I do feel, so that it's important to say what a fantastic job he did do with the surgery, and
incredible
how much our interactions meant something to me, even though they were very difficult in the moment. They sort of put me on the healing path. And so he is in the acknowledgments of brief flashings in the phenomenal world, a note of gratitude for him for putting me back together.
Oh, that is so beautiful and so gracious of you to recognize the incredible work that he did. Obviously, he was true to his word. He was going to do excellent surgery. But it's like what you say, in the beginner's mind, many possibilities; in the expert mind, very few. That's why I had asked you that question, because it does seem that probably most of us, and likely many of our listeners, have had exactly that experience, that there are a lot of people around to tell us exactly how it's going to be. But then there's this possibility of, well, what else? What is it that I don't know? Because I don't know about you, but I've often found in life that the things that can happen that are the most remarkable are the ones that I never even anticipated. They weren't even on my radar. And when I hear you talk, I connect to that.
Yes, like, this is such a minor example, but I will say, like, I'm out on my bicycle on this bike tour, and, I find myself wanting to plan it, right? And to know where am I going to be the next night and the next. And you know what? I'm making myself be in not knowing mind, which is like to stay in the not knowing and just follow my nose each day and literally to bicycle up to a hotel and say, "Do you have a room?" And it's so wonderful because it's not our normal tendency. Our normal tendency, and it's natural human way of being, is to sort of know that we're going to be safe and know where we're going to end up. And the best days I've had just on this little bike tour are where I've just gone along with what's happening, and that's a Zen practice. And it's uncomfortable sometimes, because you think, oh, I want to be in a nice place, or I want to feel safe, and but just again, it's a practice. It's not something you get to and you're done with forever and you know how to be in not knowing. It's a daily practice because it's uncomfortable. We want to know things are going to be okay. And that's normal. Like, no one should feel chided for wanting to know, but to practice not knowing is a deep form of wisdom.
Well, this has been a really delightful conversation.
I'm so glad it worked out.
I'm really, really glad it worked out. And I think you've really given me a gift today, and all of our listeners. I'm going to get a copy of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I'm heading to India in December, almost a month. And I think that I need something like this to help me with that trip, to make sure that I don't pre-plan too much.
Yes.
I want to thank you so much, Katie, and I want to wish you well on your upcoming 100-mile cycle. When is that scheduled for?
That is on August 10th in Leadville. So it's the same race series that I did the run, and now I'm doing it on my bike, which is great. It's a great way to practice beginner's mind. I'm a runner who's just learning, not learning to ride a bike, but it's a new thing for me to race a bicycle. So it's great. It's an ongoing practice that we can do every day. It's just to practice that beginner's mind.
Thank you very much for joining me, Katie.
Thank
it was
you
a delight.
So much.
Goodbye, everybody, and
Absolute
I'll speak
pleasure.
to you next month. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.